James Harden may want out of Brooklyn after the season ends. After a relatively disappointing season last year, mostly due to injuries, but nonetheless certainly disappointing, if the Brooklyn Nets don't win an NBA championship this year, in my opinion, I think there's a real possibility that James Harden may want out of Brooklyn after the season ends. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, please consider hitting that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic.
The Brooklyn Nets are in a pretty interesting situation. Currently on the season, they have the second seed in the Eastern Conference with a 29-17 record. And a lot of people coming into the year expect the Brooklyn Nets to win a championship. It's certainly championship or bust for them. But also a lot is riding on the season. Two of their star players in Kyrie Irving and James Harden have the potential to leave after the season if the Nets don't win an NBA championship. And the reason why I say Kyrie Irving could potentially leave is not necessarily due to Kyrie Irving, but more so due to the Brooklyn Nets. Maybe the Nets don't want to pay a guy like Kyrie if he's only available to play road games. And for James Harden, there's also been some reports that he may not want to be with the Brooklyn Nets, and if they don't win an NBA championship, in my opinion, I think it's that much more likely that he leaves. But at the same time, if the Nets do win an NBA championship this season, I think it's a lot more likely that everybody stays with the team. But of course, at the same time, anything could happen. We saw a guy in Kawhi Leonard leave the Toronto Raptors right after winning an NBA championship, so we'll see what happens. But now let's talk about James Harden. Why would James Harden actually want to leave the Nets when originally he was the one that wanted to come to the Nets, and he forced his way from Houston to come to the Nets? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons for why, in my opinion, and some of the reasons that I'm going to be mentioning are straight from reports, and other reasons are going to be my personal opinion. The first thing that I want to touch upon is there's been some reports coming out that James Harden doesn't necessarily enjoy living in Brooklyn. Now, this could be a reason that has nothing to do with the team whatsoever, but if a player doesn't enjoy playing in a particular city, maybe they would look for a trade out of that city. Even if the team is fantastic, obviously, it doesn't really matter what's going on with the team. But honestly, this could potentially be a pretty big reason for why James Harden may want out of the Brooklyn Nets. But another potential reason for why Harden would want out of Brooklyn during the offseason is there's also been reports that James Harden is frustrated with Kyrie Irving and the fact that he's not playing home games. Now, in my opinion, for a team like the Brooklyn Nets, I don't necessarily think the fact that Kyrie is only playing road games is necessarily a huge issue for them during the regular season, because a team like this is obviously so talented and obviously is going to be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference no matter what. Although I will say it is a great time to build chemistry between the guys, so that's one negative for Kyrie not playing during home games during the regular season. But one huge issue that I could see is when it comes down to the NBA playoffs and even the NBA finals, if the Nets make it there, if Kyrie Irving still isn't allowed to play home games, it's going to be a huge issue for the Nets. If a team is coming into Brooklyn during the NBA playoffs and playing a team like the Nets without a guy like Kyrie Irving, who's obviously a huge part of what they do, this could be very dangerous for the Nets and could potentially be the difference of winning that playoff series or losing that playoff series. And obviously it's going to be a huge factor, because if the Nets don't win an NBA championship this season, which they really should, I think there's a very good chance that the Nets could potentially lose James Harden. And especially if the Nets lose in a pretty early round, I think it's that much more likely that James Harden would leave. But let's say for the sake of the video that the Nets do make it all the way to the NBA finals. If the Nets don't have Kyrie Irving for home games, obviously that's going to be a huge dent to them as well, and they easily could lose the NBA finals solely due to the fact that Kyrie isn't playing home games. So obviously this is a humongous issue and something the Nets really need to figure out sooner rather than later. And if they don't figure this out, in my opinion, I really think this could be the difference between the Nets winning an NBA championship this season and the Nets obviously not. Now, for this next reason, there's no reports specifically talking about this issue, but this is just something that I personally think may be a reason for why Harden would want to leave the Nets. But that reason is the fact that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are on the Nets. Now, you may say, what am I talking about? Because obviously the reason why Harden wanted to come to Brooklyn was because of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, and he wanted to build a big three with these guys in order to try to win an NBA championship. So obviously when Harden played in Houston, he had the ball in his hands most of the time, basically 100% of the time. He was scoring basically all the points, or if he wasn't scoring, he had the ball in his hands and was passing to his players for easy points. But overall, he had the ball in his hands most of the time. But obviously now when you're playing with guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, you're not going to have the ball in your hands all the time. And there's been a bunch of times while watching Brooklyn Nets games where James Harden is kind of just sitting on the side and acting as a spot-up three-point shooter, which is fine if you're winning, but if you're not winning, I think that could really be an issue. Whenever superstar players team up in order to try to win an NBA championship, they're always fine originally to take less minutes maybe, or take the ball out of their hands a little bit more, maybe take less shots in the clutch. They're always fine with that originally if that leads to winning an NBA championship. But if it doesn't lead to winning an NBA championship, I think those players would eventually get frustrated with their situation and potentially request a trade out or maybe just leave in free agency. And I think that's really the point where James Harden is in at currently. If the Nets are winning an NBA championship, I don't necessarily think he's going to care about his role that much, but if they're not winning an NBA championship, I think he will care a lot more about his individual role. Now, there's certain games where the Nets run through James Harden mostly and he completely goes off. Obviously, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but there's just so many times where the ball's in Kyrie's hands a little too much, or maybe Kevin Durant's hands a little too much, and maybe not even a little too much, but maybe too much for James Harden. And I could honestly see a guy like Harden potentially getting a little upset with the situation after some time, especially if they don't win. And that's really the point I'm trying to make with this. But of course, winning cures everything, and in my opinion, if the Nets do win an NBA championship, all these issues will go away. But now let's talk about how likely the Brooklyn Nets are to winning an NBA championship this season. So in my opinion, as I mentioned before in the video, I think the Nets have a fantastic chance at winning the championship, and last season they were my pick to win the championship, and I think a lot of other people's pick as well. The top end talent that the Nets have is far superior to any other team, in my opinion at least, when you talk about Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. All three of these guys are absolute superstars that could hit clutch shots and play very well once it comes down to the NBA playoffs. So the real question was, if these three guys could play together in terms of running an efficient offense, if that could happen, these guys could be absolutely unstoppable. And in my opinion, over these past 2 seasons or so, I think the Nets have proven the ability to play well together, but the issue is they really haven't been able to all stay on the court together for a significant amount of time, especially when it came down to the NBA playoffs. Of course, last year, James Harden got injured later on in the playoffs. Kyrie Irving also got injured as well, and it really turned out to be only Kevin Durant in the latter half of that Milwaukee Bucks series where they actually lost to them. If the Nets could stay healthy, I think they have a great chance at winning the championship, but the next issue that they really need to figure out is the Kyrie Irving situation, and they really need to figure out that situation to make sure he could play home games, because as I mentioned before in the video, I really do think that could be the difference between the Brooklyn Nets winning an NBA championship and them not. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think James Harden will stay with the Brooklyn Nets after the season, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check out one of these other 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics. Hope you can't go where I'm headed.